A wedding shrouded in secrets. The wedding was perfect, until the toast. Under the golden glow of chandeliers, Emma and Daniel sat at the head table, fingers entwined, basking in the warmth of their love. Their guests raised glasses, laughter echoing, across the grand reception hall. Then Daniel's father, Charles, stood, clearing his throat. "I've watched my son grow into a man of integrity," he began, his voice proud yet thick with emotion. "And Emma, dear, beautiful Emma, you are a treasure to this family. A long-lost treasure, in fact." A murmur spread through the crowd. Emma's fingers tightened around her champagne flute. Charles exhaled heavily. "There's something I need to confess." He hesitated, his eyes flicking toward his wife, then back to the couple. "Years ago, before I married Daniel's mother, His voice wavered. "I had an affair, and from that affair, a child was born." Emma's breath hitched. A cold wave of dread washed over her. "It was you, Emma." Charles's words struck like a lightning bolt. "You are my daughter." The world around them blurred, gasps, whispers, clinking glasses set down in a rush. Daniel's grip on her hand slackened. He turned to her, horror dawning in his eyes. "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible." "We had no idea," Charles insisted. "Your mother, she never told me until recently. She put you up for adoption. If I had known..." His voice cracked with regret. Emma's heartbeat pounded against her ribs. Daniel pushed back his chair, standing so abruptly it scraped against the floor. This can't be true," Daniel muttered, running a hand through his hair. He looked at her with anguish, as if the very foundation of their love was crumbling. Beneath them, tears welled in Emma's eyes. Everything, the years of love, the whispered dreams, the future they had planned, shattered in an instant. Their perfect day had become their greatest nightmare. A Wedding Shrouded in Secrets, Part 2. The weight of the revelation hung heavy in the air. Emma's vision blurred as she looked at Daniel, his face a mask of devastation. The love of her life, her partner, her future, was now possibly her brother? No. Daniel shook his head, his voice raw. "There has to be a mistake, a test, something. We can't just accept this as truth." Emma clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles turning white. She wanted to run, to wake up from this nightmare, to go back to moments before when everything had been perfect. "I swear I wouldn't have let this happen if I had known." Charles's voice trembled. His wife, Daniel's mother, sat frozen, her face pale. Emma's own mother, Mary Ann, stood from her table, her expression tight with guilt. "Charles, I told you this was not the time," she hissed, her eyes darting to Emma. Emma's stomach twisted. "You knew?" Her voice cracked, betrayal cutting through her like a knife. "You knew and said nothing?" Mary Ann's lip trembled. I didn't know he was Daniel's father until recently. I had no idea you two were together until the engagement announcement." A choked sob escaped Emma. "And you didn't think to tell me?" Mary Ann's gaze dropped to the floor. The guests, their joyful chatter silenced, sat in stunned silence, whispering behind hands, watching as the fairy tale wedding unraveled before them. Daniel let out a ragged breath. "We need to get out of here," he murmured. Emma nodded. She didn't care about the guests, the reception, or the thousands of dollars spent on a perfect night. None of it mattered anymore. Only the man standing beside her, the man she loved, was real. Without another word, they walked out of the grand ballroom, leaving gasps and stunned faces behind. The cold night air hit Emma like a slap, grounding her. Daniel stood in front of her, searching her face. "What do we do?" she whispered, her voice breaking. He swallowed hard. We find out the truth. A DNA test. Right away. His jaw clenched, because I refused to believe that the universe could be this cruel. Tears streaked down her cheeks as she nodded. And if it's true? Daniel's breath hitched, his hands trembling as he reached for hers. Then, we figure it out. Together. Even in the face of devastation, he refused to let go. And neither would she. Their love, tested beyond reason, had one final battle to fight. The truth. A Wedding Shrouded in Secrets, Part 3. The hotel suite felt suffocating. Emma sat curled on the edge of the king-sized bed, her wedding gown pooling around her in a heap of satin and lace. She had dreamed of this night for years, but not like this. Never like this. Daniel stood by the window, his hands pressed against the glass, his reflection ghostly in the dim city lights. The silence between them stretched, thick with uncertainty. Emma finally spoke, her voice hoarse. The test. We need to do it first thing in the morning. Daniel turned, his jaw tight. I've already booked an appointment at a private lab. They promised expedited results. We'll know within 24 hours. She exhaled, relief and fear tangling in her chest. Thank you. He crossed the room, kneeling before her, his hands resting gently on her knees. No matter what happens, Emma. His voice wavered. You are the love of my life. Nothing can change that. A sob caught in her throat. She reached for him, pulling him into an embrace, clinging to him like he was the only thing keeping her from drowning. I don't know how to breathe without you, she whispered. You won't have to. He pulled back just enough to press a kiss to her forehead. It was soft, reverent, as if he could hold on to her through touch alone. But they both knew the truth could break them. The longest 24 hours. Every tick of the clock felt like a countdown to destruction. Emma sat on the couch in Daniel's apartment, staring at her phone, willing the lab to call. Her mother had tried reaching out, but Emma ignored every attempt. The betrayal ran too deep. Daniel paced, his usual calm replaced with barely restrained energy. I don't know how to prepare for this, he admitted. Do I brace for heartbreak, or do I let myself hope? Emma gripped her arms. I can't let myself believe we're related. I can't. Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. Emma's stomach twisted into knots as he answered. Yes, this is Daniel Westwood. His voice was steady, but she could see the way his fingers trembled. Silence. A pause. Then his eyes widened. He turned to Emma, his throat bobbing as he swallowed hard. Say that again. Another moment of silence. Daniel's shoulders sagged. His expression, raw, disbelieving, was unreadable. Emma couldn't breathe. Daniel. Slowly, he pulled the phone away from his ear, exhaling sharply. His gaze locked onto hers, something unreadable flickering in his stormy blue eyes. We're not related. The words hit her like a tidal wave. Her whole body went limp as relief coursed through her, knocking the breath from her lungs. We're not? Daniel shook his head, a shaky laugh escaping him. No, the test confirmed it. We're not siblings. Tears blurred her vision as she lunged forward, throwing her arms around his neck. He caught her, his grip almost desperate, as he buried his face into her hair. I thought I lost you, he whispered, voice thick with emotion. Never, she swore. Never. Their lips met in a kiss so deep, so consuming, it erased every moment of fear and pain. Their love had been tested in the cruelest way imaginable, but they had survived, and now, nothing would ever break them again. A Wedding Shrouded in Secrets, Part 4. The relief of knowing they weren't related was intoxicating, but the damage had already been done. Their wedding day had been shattered, their families fractured, and the trust they once had in those closest to them was hanging by a thread. Daniel cupped Emma's face, his forehead resting against hers. "We should be celebrating," he murmured, brushing his thumb along her cheek. "But I feel like something's still broken." Emma pulled back slightly, her heart still hammering. "Because it is," she admitted. "Our families lied to us, kept secrets that could have ruined us. I don't even know how to look at my mother right now." Daniel clenched his jaw. "And my father," he exhaled sharply. What the hell was he thinking, dropping that at our wedding? Who does that? Emma shook her head. "We have to confront them. We deserve answers." Confronting the truth later. That evening, they arrived at Charles Westwood's estate, the mansion standing cold and imposing under the moonlight. Daniel's mother, Olivia, had refused to answer their calls, and Marianne, Emma's mother, had only sent a string of apologetic texts. As they stepped inside, the tension was palpable. Charles stood by the fireplace, his face lined with exhaustion. Olivia sat stiffly on the couch, arms crossed, eyes red-rimmed from crying. Marianne hovered near the entrance, wringing her hands. Daniel didn't waste time. "Why?" His voice was sharp, controlled, but barely. "Why did you think it was okay to say something like that at our wedding? Why not before?" Charles sighed, heavily. "I thought I was doing the right thing." His voice was hoarse. "When I learned that Emma might be my daughter, I couldn't keep it in any longer. I thought you deserved the truth." Emma scoffed. "The truth? You didn't even know for sure. You dropped a bomb on our lives without proof." Charles flinched, looking genuinely remorseful. "I was wrong," he admitted. "I should have handled it differently." Olivia, silent until now, finally spoke, her voice cutting. "Handled it differently? Differently? You humiliated our son. You humiliated me." Her eyes flashed with fury as she turned to Emma. "And you." She inhaled sharply. "How long have you known?" Emma stiffened. "Excuse me?" Olivia stood, her cold gaze piercing. "Did you know about this possibility before the wedding?" Emma's mouth fell open. "Are you seriously blaming me for this? I just found out." Marianne finally stepped forward, her voice weak. "This is my fault. I should have told Emma the truth a long time ago." She turned to Charles, eyes pleading. "But I thought keeping it buried was the right choice. I didn't know who her father was until I saw you in that engagement announcement." Charles shook his head. "And instead of telling me in private, you let this fester. You let me believe—" He stopped himself, glancing at Daniel, shame written all over his face. "I never wanted to hurt either of you." Daniel exhaled through his nose. "Well, congratulations. You did." The room fell into silence, the weight of everything pressing down on them. Emma finally spoke, her voice quiet but firm. "This doesn't just go away overnight. You all broke something, and I don't know if we can fix it." Daniel nodded, looking at his parents. "We need space. From all of you." Olivia opened her mouth to protest, but Charles held up a hand. "Give them what they need," he said quietly. Emma reached for Daniel's hand, squeezing it. "We're going away for a while." Daniel glanced at her, then back at his family. "When we come back, we'll decide if we even want a relationship with any of you." And with that, they turned and walked out the door. A new beginning. Waves crashed against the shore as Emma dug her toes into the cool sand. The private villa Daniel had booked was secluded, a paradise far away from the mess they had left behind. He walked up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, pressing, a soft kiss to her shoulder. "You okay?" she exhaled, leaning into him. "I think so." They had spent the last few days in quiet reflection, rebuilding, healing, talking about everything. "I'm glad we left," she admitted. Daniel turned her around, tilting her chin up. "Me too." His eyes softened. But I want to go back eventually. Not for them. For us. To move forward. Emma studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Together? His lips curled into a small smile. Always. As he kissed her, slow and deep under the setting sun, Emma realized something. The wedding had been a disaster. Their families were fractured, their trust had been tested, but their love had survived. And that was all that mattered. A wedding, shrouded in secrets, Part 5. The tropical breeze played with Emma's hair as she sat on the villa's terrace, watching the sun dip into the horizon. A week had passed since they had left everything behind, and for the first time in days, she felt like she could breathe again. Daniel emerged from the villa, barefoot, his linen shirt unbuttoned at the top. He carried 2 glasses of wine, handing one to her before settling beside her. To surviving the worst wedding in history, he said with a wry smirk, clinking his glass against hers. Emma laughed softly, shaking her head. I think we deserve a do-over. Daniel arched a brow. A do-over? She turned to face him, her expression thoughtful. Not a big wedding. No fancy ballroom, no hundreds of guests, just us. She hesitated, searching his face. Would that be crazy? His gaze softened. Emma, if you wanted to marry me, barefoot on this beach right now, I'd do it. Warmth spread through her chest. She placed her glass down and reached for his hand. Then let's do it, right here, just us. Daniel studied her for a long moment, then smiled. Okay. A wedding for 2. The next afternoon, Emma stood at the water's edge, the waves gently licking at her feet. She wore a simple white sundress, her hair loose and windswept. In her hands, she held a bouquet of wildflowers they had picked together that morning. Daniel stood before her, looking at her like she was the only thing in the world. No tuxedo, no grand ceremony, just a white linen shirt and the love in his eyes. A local officiant stood between them, smiling warmly. No guests? He asked. Emma shook her head. No, just us. Daniel reached for her hands, his fingers lacing with hers. I never needed an audience to love you. Tears pricked her eyes as the officiant began. The words were simple, but powerful. When it was time for vows, Daniel squeezed her hands gently. I thought I lost you, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. For one terrifying moment, I thought the world was cruel enough to take you away from me. And I realized something that day. Nothing matters more than us. Not our pasts, not our families. Just us. He inhaled shakily. I promise to love you no matter what storms come our way. I promise to choose you. Always. Emma swallowed past the lump in her throat. Daniel, she whispered. When my world fell apart, you held me together. Even when everything was uncertain, the only thing I knew for sure was you. You are my home, my heart. I will love you every day for the rest of my life. A tear slipped down her cheek, but Daniel caught it with his thumb, smiling through his own. With these vows, the officiant said, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Daniel didn't wait. He pulled her into a deep, desperate kiss, sealing their promises in the ocean breeze. When they finally broke apart, he grinned. We did it. Emma laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. No unexpected family revelations. This time, Daniel chuckled, spinning her around. Only love. As the waves crashed behind them and the golden sun bathed them in warmth, Emma knew. This was how their story was always meant to be. Not perfect, but theirs. A Wedding Shrouded in Secrets, Part 6. The first few days of marriage felt like a dream. Emma and Daniel spent their time wrapped in each other, leaving behind the chaos that had nearly torn them apart. but reality had a way of creeping in. On their last night at the villa, Emma sat on the porch swing, staring at the glow of her phone screen. Her mother's name flashed across it, another missed call. Marianne had been reaching out daily, but Emma wasn't ready to face her. Daniel walked up behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "You should talk to her," he murmured. Emma sighed, tilting her head against his arm. "I know, but I don't know what to say." He sat beside her, threading his fingers through hers. "Maybe you don't have to know. Just listen." Emma hesitated. Then, with a deep breath, she hit the call button. Her mother picked up on the first ring. "Emma?" Her voice was filled with cautious hope. Emma closed her eyes. "Hi, Mom." A long silence stretched between them. Then Marianne exhaled shakily. "I didn't know if you'd ever speak to me again." Emma swallowed hard. "I almost didn't." "I deserve that," Marianne admitted. "I don't expect you to forgive me overnight, but I need you to know. I never wanted to hurt you. I thought I was protecting you." Emma's throat tightened. "By keeping me in the dark? By letting me walk into my own wedding thinking my fiancé might be my brother?" "I was wrong," Marianne whispered. "I was selfish, and I will regret it for the rest of my life." Emma glanced at Daniel, his steady presence grounding her. She sighed. "I don't know if I can just move past this." "You don't have to," her mother said softly. "But I'm still your mother, and I love you." Emma bit her lip, emotions tangling inside her. "I need time." Marianne's voice wavered. "Take as long as you need, sweetheart. I'll be here." When Emma hung up, she let out a slow breath, resting her head against Daniel's shoulder. "That was harder than I thought." Daniel pressed a kiss to her temple. "But you did it." She nodded. One step at a time. Returning home. A week later, they were back in New York. The moment they stepped into their apartment, Emma felt the weight of the past month settle on her shoulders. Daniel dropped their bags and stretched. "Home, sweet home." Emma let out a soft laugh. "It feels different." He wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her close. "Because everything is different. We're married now." He kissed her nose. "Officially, without any interruptions this time." She smiled, resting her hands against his chest. "You know what I realized?" "What?" She looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. "That no matter what happens, as long as I have you, I can handle anything." Daniel's expression softened, his hands sliding to cup her face. "Emma Westwood," he murmured, testing out her new last name. "You are the best thing that ever happened to me," she grinned. "Damn right I am." He laughed, lifting her off her feet and carrying her toward the bedroom. "Mrs. Westwood, I think it's time we properly celebrated our honeymoon." Emma laughed as he kicked the door shut behind them, knowing that after everything they had been through, their love had only grown stronger, and this was only the beginning of their forever, the end. A wedding shrouded in secrets. Epilogue. 6 months later, Emma stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the delicate gold necklace resting against her collarbone. The past half-year had been a whirlwind of healing, love, and tentative reconnections. She and Daniel had settled into married life, creating a space where they could just be, without the weight of their family's mistakes suffocating them. Tonight, though, was a test. Their first family gathering since the wedding debacle, Daniel walked into their bedroom, pausing as he took her in. "You look stunning." Emma turned, offering a nervous smile. "And you're dangerously handsome, but I don't think that's going to stop this dinner from being awkward as hell." Daniel sighed, straightening his tie. "Probably not, but we can leave whenever we want." That was the deal. They would give their families a chance. One dinner. If it went south, they would walk away. No guilt, no second-guessing. Emma exhaled. "Okay, let's do this." An uneasy truce. The restaurant was elegant, dimly lit with soft candlelight. When Emma and Daniel arrived, Charles and Olivia were already seated, along with Mary Ann. The tension was thick, but everyone tried to act normal. Emma, Daniel. Charles stood, offering a hesitant smile. "Thank you for coming." Emma nodded, sitting beside Daniel. "We said we'd give this a try." A waiter arrived, pouring wine as everyone exchanged polite, strained conversation. Then Mary Ann cleared her throat. "Emma," she started cautiously, "I know things between us haven't been the same. I just want to say, I'm proud of you." Emma blinked, caught off guard. "Proud? For standing your ground, for choosing love despite everything." "I wasn't brave enough to do that when I was younger." Emma stared at her mother for a long moment, emotions warring inside her. "I'm still angry," she admitted. Mary Ann nodded. "And I'll keep trying to make it right." Silence stretched between them before Emma finally sighed. "Okay." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was something. Across the table, Daniel and his parents exchanged a similar quiet understanding. Charles, for all his flaws, had shown true remorse. Olivia, though still guarded, had softened toward Emma, seeing now that she was family. They weren't perfect. Their wounds weren't fully healed. But for the first time, it felt like they were all trying. Daniel squeezed Emma's hand under the table, his thumb brushing over her wedding band. And as the night went on, Emma realized something. Love wasn't just about grand gestures or perfect moments. It was about choosing each other, choosing forgiveness, choosing to move forward even when the past threatened to pull you back. And in that moment, she knew they were going to be okay, no matter what. The true beginning. A wedding shrouded in secrets. Final chapter. Later that night, as Emma and Daniel walked hand in hand through the quiet streets of Manhattan, she let out a deep breath. "Well, that was better than expected," Daniel chuckled. "A low bar to clear, considering our last family gathering involved a near-wedding crashing paternity scandal." Emma nudged him playfully. "True." She glanced up at him, her expression turning more serious. "Do you think this will ever feel normal again?" Daniel thought for a moment, his thumb tracing circles against her palm. "I think this is our normal now. Messy, complicated, but still ours." She smiled softly. "I can live with that." As they reached their apartment, Daniel hesitated at the door. "Come with me." Emma raised a brow. "Where?" He didn't answer, just took her hand and led her to the rooftop of their building. The city sprawled beneath them, glittering like a sea of stars. The air was crisp, the faint hum of traffic distant below. Daniel turned to her, pulling something from his pocket. A small velvet box. Emma's breath hitched. "Daniel," he smirked. "Relax, Mrs. Westwood. I already married you." He flipped open the box, revealing a delicate gold band inlaid with tiny sapphires. "This is just something extra. A promise ring, in a way. Not for the past, but for the future." Emma felt her throat tighten. "You don't have to promise me anything, Daniel. You already gave me forever." "I know," he murmured, slipping the ring onto her finger right beside her wedding band. "But after everything we've been through, I want to remind you, no matter what comes next, I'll always choose you." Tears pricked her eyes, but they were the good kind this time. The kind that didn't come from pain, but from overwhelming love. She cupped his face, pressing her forehead against his. "I'll always choose you too," Daniel grinned. "Good, because I was really hoping we could start talking about baby names soon." Emma's eyes widened. "What?" He shrugged, teasing. "You don't want a tiny version of us running around?" She laughed, shaking her head. Maybe one day. Then she wrapped her arms around him, her heart full. But for now, let's just enjoy us. And as Daniel kissed her under the city lights, Emma knew that despite the heartbreak, the secrets, and the chaos of their past, their future was theirs to write. The end. A wedding, shrouded in secrets, extended epilogue. 2 years later, Emma stood in the nursery, her hand resting on the curved swell of her belly. Soft golden light filtered through the curtains, casting a warm glow over the room. The crib was all ready. Set up, the walls painted a calming shade of sage green. A bookshelf filled with tiny storybooks lined the wall, and a stuffed bunny sat waiting in the corner. She exhaled, a mix of excitement and nerves coursing through her. "I can't believe we're almost there," she murmured, running her hand over her stomach. Behind her, Daniel wrapped his arms around her, pressing a kiss to her temple. 2 more months, he said, his voice full of awe. Then we finally meet her. Emma smiled, placing her hands over his. "Are you ready to be a dad?" Daniel chuckled. "If you're asking whether I've memorized the baby books, absolutely not. But am I ready to love her more than anything in this world?" "Yes," she turned in his arms, searching his face. "Even after everything with our families? Even after the chaos we went through?" His expression softened, his fingers brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. "That chaos brought us here, Em. It made us stronger. And I wouldn't change a single second of it." She leaned into him, breathing in his familiar scent, grounding herself in the steady beat of his heart. Then a sudden kick made her gasp. Daniel's eyes widened. "Was that?" Emma laughed, taking his hand and placing it over her belly just in time for another tiny thump. His breath hitched, wonder filling his eyes. "She's strong," Emma smirked. "Like her parents." Daniel chuckled, then pressed a reverent kiss to her belly. "I can't wait to meet you, little one." As they stood there, wrapped in each other, Emma realized something. Their love had survived lies, betrayals, and painful secrets. It had been tested, shaken, and nearly torn apart. But in the end, love had won. And now they were building something new, something stronger, a family, a future, a love story that would last a lifetime, the true beginning. A wedding shrouded in secrets. Final epilogue, a love that lasts. 8 years later, the scent of fresh-baked cookies filled the Westwood home, mingling with the soft hum of a lullaby playing in the background. Emma stood in the kitchen, pulling a tray of warm chocolate chip cookies from the oven while little feet patted across the hardwood floor. "Mama, look!" Emma turned just in time to see 6-year-old Lila twirling in the middle of the living room, her chestnut curls bouncing as she spun in her pink tutu. "You're getting so good, sweetheart," Emma praised, setting the tray down before wiping, her hands on a dish towel. Lila grinned, her dimpled cheeks glowing with pride. "Daddy said I'm a real ballerina now," Emma laughed. "Daddy's right." As if on cue, the front door opened and Daniel stepped in, loosening his tie. "What's this about me being right?" he teased, setting his briefcase down and heading straight for his girls. Lila beamed and ran into his arms. "Daddy, did you see my new twirl?" Daniel scooped her up effortlessly, spinning her in the air. "I think that was the best twirl in the history of twirls." Lila giggled, basking in the attention before she wiggled down and ran off to practice some more. Emma leaned against the counter, watching him with a smile. "Rough day?" Daniel exhaled, rolling his shoulders. "Nothing a cookie and a kiss. From my wife can't fix," she smirked, lifting a warm cookie to his lips. "You drive a hard bargain, Mr. Westwood." He took a bite, humming in approval before wrapping his arms around her waist. "You still make the best cookies. And more importantly, you still make my world perfect." Emma melted into his embrace, resting her head against his chest. "It doesn't feel real sometimes, does it?" she murmured. "After everything we went through, after all the chaos, I never imagined we'd have this. Daniel pressed a kiss to her forehead. We fought for this, Emma. We chose each other, even when it was hard, and I'd do it all again in a heartbeat. A soft cry came from the baby monitor on the counter. Daniel grinned. I got it. Emma watched as he disappeared down the hall, returning moments later with their youngest, 4-month-old James, nestled against his chest. The baby settled instantly in his father's arms, his tiny hand gripping Daniel's shirt. Emma's heart swelled. This was home. Not the picture-perfect life she once thought she wanted, not the grand fairy tale wedding or the illusion of an untarnished past, but something real. Something built on love, trust, and the promise that no matter what came their way, they would always face it together. Daniel met her gaze, as if reading her thoughts. Forever, he whispered. Emma smiled, stepping into his arms, wrapping them both in her embrace. Forever. And as their children's laughter filled the air and the warmth of their love surrounded them, Emma knew. This was the happiest ending of all. The end. A wedding shrouded in secrets, legacy of love. 10 years later. The Westwood household was alive with the chaos of a Saturday morning. Lila, now a strong-willed 10-year-old, was chasing after her younger brother, James, who was 6 and already proving to be just as mischievous as his father had been at his age. The living room was a battlefield of toys, books, and an old soccer ball that had somehow ended up in the kitchen. Emma stood in the doorway, watching the madness with a smile. The years had flown by, each one filled with its own triumphs and challenges. But through it all, she and Daniel had built something extraordinary. A family that was more than just surviving, but truly thriving. Can you believe they're ours? Emma said softly, leaning against the doorframe as Daniel stepped up beside her, wiping his hands on a dish towel. He glanced at their children, shaking his head in awe. I remember when we thought we'd never make it this far. I didn't even know if we'd ever get here. Emma smiled, reaching for his hand. But we did, and we're here, together. Yeah, he said, squeezing her fingers. And I wouldn't change a thing, not even the drama of that wedding weekend. Emma laughed, her eyes gleaming with warmth. You say that now. Hey, the kids are still alive and mostly well-adjusted, he teased. That's a win, right? Their laughter was interrupted by a sudden loud cry from the hallway. Lila came charging down the stairs, her face red with frustration. James took my favorite book again. James appeared moments later, trying to dodge his sister's grasp while proudly clutching a well-worn copy of The Princess and the Pirate, the same book Lila had insisted on reading for weeks straight. James, give it back, Lila shouted, hands on her hips. Not until you trade me, James yelled back, not an ounce of fear in his voice. Emma and Daniel exchanged an amused glance. Looks like it's one of those days, Emma said with a smile. Better start negotiating peace talks, Daniel replied, his voice full of affection. Later. That evening after dinner, as the kids played in the yard, Emma and Daniel sat together on the back porch, the warm evening breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak tree in the backyard. The sun had set, leaving behind a sky speckled with stars. Emma rested her head on Daniel's shoulder, a soft sigh escaping her lips. Do you think the kids will ever know the full story? Daniel's gaze was steady as he looked at their children, who were now laughing and chasing each other with the abandon of youth. I think when they're ready, we'll tell them, but not yet. They don't need to carry the weight of our past. They have their own lives to live. Emma nodded thoughtfully. You're right. I guess all I want for them is to know what we know now, to know how much we love them, and how much we love each other. That's the real story. Daniel placed a hand on hers, his touch gentle. And that's the story we've given them. A story built on love, trust, and the kind of commitment that doesn't waver no matter what happens. We're laying the foundation for their future. Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't fought through it all? If we hadn't chosen each other over everything else? Emma asked softly, her fingers tracing the outline of her wedding band. Every single day, he replied, but I don't think about it to regret what we went through. I think about it because it's what made us who we are, and I wouldn't trade us for anything. Emma smiled, leaning in to kiss him gently. Me neither. A new chapter. The following spring, Emma and Daniel stood together at the edge of a new beginning, selling their first home. They'd spent the last several weeks preparing to move into a larger house, one that would allow their growing family to spread out, but it was harder than they'd anticipated. This home had seen them through the most transformative years of their lives. Standing in the doorway, Daniel pulled her close. You okay? Emma nodded, wiping a stray tear from her cheek. It's just, this place holds so many memories. Our wedding night. Our first Christmas as a family. The day we found out we were pregnant with James. I know, Daniel said softly, kissing her forehead. But we've made memories in every room, and we'll make even more in the new house. This is just the start of another chapter. Emma smiled through her tears. I'm ready for the next chapter, as long as it's with you. Always, Daniel murmured, pulling her into a tight embrace. As they stood there, together, they knew that their love story, one full of unexpected twists and turns, heartbreaks and triumphs, was far from over. It was just entering its next phase, and the future looked brighter than ever. No matter what challenges lay ahead, Emma and Daniel had learned that love, when chosen and nurtured with intention, could withstand anything. And this, in its truest form, was the kind of love that would carry them into the rest of their lives. The end. A wedding shrouded in secrets, a legacy of forever. 15 years later. The Westwood family had changed, yet in so many ways it had stayed the same. The house was no longer the bustling, chaotic nest it once was, but the warmth of love and laughter still filled every corner. The children, once tiny and dependent, were growing into their own versions of the people they were meant to be. Lila was now 16, smart, determined, and with a streak of independence that both challenged and amazed her parents. James, at 12, was already proving to be the family jokester with a sharp wit and charm that seemed to make him the center of every room he entered. And the baby, the one they had almost forgotten to plan for, was now a curious 7-year-old boy named Theo, always asking questions about the world with wide-eyed wonder. Emma leaned against the kitchen counter, watching Daniel play soccer, with Theo in the backyard. The evening light cast a golden hue over the scene, and she couldn't help but smile at how effortlessly the years had slipped by. There had been ups and downs, moments where they questioned everything, but through it all, their foundation was solid. Everything okay? Daniel's voice brought her back to the present as he walked in, wiping his hands on his shirt after the game. She met his gaze, her heart full. Yeah, just thinking. He smiled, crossing the room to her. I know that look. What's on your mind? Emma let out a soft laugh, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Just how far we've come. The kids are growing up so fast. I never thought we'd get here when everything was falling apart. But here we are, still standing, still together. Daniel's hand found hers, his fingers threading through hers with a quiet intensity. You're right. We've come a long way. But every moment, every hard decision we made brought us closer. I wouldn't change a thing. She tilted her head, studying him with a knowing smile. Except for maybe that one night with the whole wedding fiasco, huh? Daniel laughed, the sound deep and full of affection. I think it's safe to say that we've both learned from that chaos. And I'm proud of how we handled it. how you handled it, how we found our way to each other even when the world seemed like it was falling apart." Emma's eyes softened, and she pulled him into a hug, resting her head on his chest. "You've been my rock, always. Even when I didn't know what I needed, you were there. I don't think I'll ever stop being thankful for that." Daniel kissed, the top of her head holding her tight. "And I'll never stop being thankful for you. For us." A new beginning. A few weeks later, Emma stood before a small gathering of their closest friends and family, the backyard decorated with strings of lights that twinkled against the dusk sky. This was no ordinary event. It was the celebration of a new chapter, one they had all fought for and worked toward. It was the day Emma and Daniel decided to renew their vows. Their children, older now but still as involved as ever, stood beside them. Lila, who had become a stunning young woman in her own right, looked at her parents with admiration. James, with his infectious smile, stood tall as the proud best man, while Theo bounced on his heels, eagerly awaiting his turn to speak. Daniel held Emma's hands tightly as the officiant spoke words of love, of commitment, of family. The vows they had written this time were simple, but they carried weight. "I still choose you, Emma, every day, through everything. You are my home, my heart, my forever," Daniel said, his voice thick with emotion. Emma's heart swelled with a love so deep it seemed to stretch across time. "I choose you too, Daniel, for all of it. The hard times, the easy times, the quiet moments, and the chaos. You are my soul, my partner, and my best friend." They exchanged rings once more. But this time there was no question. Their commitment wasn't just to each other. It was to the life they had built, to the family that had grown stronger with every challenge they had faced. As they kissed under the glowing lights, their children cheering them on, Emma realized something important. It wasn't the fairy tale ending she'd once imagined. It was even better. It was real, and their love, though it had been tested in the most difficult ways, had stood the test of time. The end. A wedding shrouded in secrets. A future of love. 20 years later. The Westwood household had evolved into something a little quieter, a little more peaceful, but no less full of love. The kids were adults now, each carving their own path in the world. Lila, having gone off to college and found a career in architecture, was already talking about buying her first home. James, who had grown into a natural comedian, was beginning to make a name for himself in stand-up comedy while pursuing his passion for writing. Theo, now a bright and thoughtful teenager, was setting his sights on becoming a historian, often poring over books with the same intensity he once reserved for soccer. But today wasn't about their children. Today was about Emma and Daniel, two people who had weathered the storms of their past and come out stronger, more connected than ever before. They had a tradition now. Each year, on their anniversary, they would go back to where it all began. The small lakeside cabin they had rented years ago for a simple getaway, before they had known how much their lives would change. Before their love had been tested in ways neither of them had imagined. Emma stood on the porch of the cabin, the cool breeze of early autumn tugging at her sweater. The lake before her shimmered, bathed in the warm glow of the setting sun. She wrapped her arms around herself, taking in the quiet beauty of it all. Behind her, Daniel came up, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder. "This place always takes me back," he said softly. "Me too," Emma replied, her voice thick with emotion. "It feels like it was another lifetime ago. But at the same time, it feels like we've never left." Daniel smiled, the lines on his face more pronounced now, but his eyes still held the same warmth, the same love that had drawn her to him all those years ago. "It's amazing, isn't it? All we've been through, and here we are." She leaned back into him, closing her eyes for a moment. I thought I was broken when we first met. I didn't think I could ever trust anyone the way I needed to. And then I just showed up," he finished for her, his tone teasing but soft. "Like I always do," Emma chuckled, turning in his arms to face him. "And I'm glad you did. Every moment, even when it felt like it was falling apart, it brought us here. To this." She touched his cheek gently. "You are everything I never knew I needed." He took her hand, kissing the palm before holding it over his heart. "I feel the same way. We weren't meant to have a perfect love story, but the one we've built is better than I ever imagined." They stood there in the fading light, wrapped in each other's presence, both aware of the deep comfort in knowing that the future was theirs to create, together. The legacy of Westwood. Love. Several weeks later, they hosted a small family gathering. At their home to celebrate their 20-year anniversary, their children were there, now adults with lives of their own, but still bound by the roots of the love that had shaped their childhoods. Lila brought her fiancé, a kind and steady woman named Sarah, who fit seamlessly into the family. James joked and teased, making everyone laugh as he recounted hilarious stories from his stand-up performances. Theo, quiet and reflective as ever, shared his plans to study abroad, exploring historical sites in Europe. As the evening wore on, Emma and Daniel found themselves sitting alone on the porch, watching the stars appear one by one in the dark sky. Above? "This is it, isn't it?" Emma said, a smile tugging at her lips. Daniel nodded. "It's hard to believe how far we've come." He chuckled softly, his voice tinged with wonder. "Sometimes it still feels like I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop, like I'm waiting for the storm to hit again." Emma shook her head. "But you know what? There isn't another shoe, Daniel. We've been through it all, and this peace, this love is real." "Yeah." He squeezed her hand, his grip firm and steady. "It's real. And it's ours." They sat in companionable silence, the years of their love and shared memories washing over them. They had walked through storms, braved unexpected challenges, and learned to build a life together, even when it seemed impossible. And now, at this moment, with the stars overhead and their children thriving, they knew that this love would last a lifetime. Emma leaned her head on Daniel's shoulder, smiling as they watched their family, the laughter, the warmth, the togetherness. They had created something beautiful, something worth fighting for. And as the night deepened around them, Emma whispered the words that had been in her heart for all these years. "I still choose you, Daniel. Always." "I always choose you, Emma," he whispered back, "forever." And together, they knew they had found the greatest love of all, the kind that transcended time, the kind that endured through every challenge, every trial, the kind of love that would carry them through the rest of their lives. The end. A wedding shrouded in secrets, the eternal love story, 25 years later. The Westwood home was still the heart of the family, even though the children had long since left to carve their own futures. The walls, once filled with the sounds of laughter and the chaos of daily life, had grown quieter. Yet, the love that had been forged in its rooms, through all the trials and triumphs, remained as strong as ever. Emma and Daniel had learned long ago that love didn't always come wrapped in perfection. It came in quiet moments, in shared glances, in the way you leaned into each other after all the storms. Their journey had been neither smooth nor simple, but it had been theirs. And that, in the end, was enough. Today, though, was special. Today, they had gathered once more, not just as a family, but to celebrate the legacy they had built, a legacy that had far exceeded their expectations. The backyard, once filled with the laughter of their children, was now a peaceful garden where the sound of birds chirping was the dominant noise. Emma had spent years nurturing the space, turning it into a sanctuary. Daniel often joked that it was the only thing in their lives that never went through a rough patch. The air was crisp, the sun low in the sky, and Emma found herself standing at the edge of the garden, gazing at the setting sun as she had done all those years ago in their early days together. Daniel walked up beside her, his hand resting gently on her back. "You okay?" he asked, his voice filled with the warmth of years spent knowing each other's silences. Emma smiled softly, her hand resting on her chest as she felt the steady rhythm of her heart. "Just thinking about everything. How we've come full circle. All the changes, all the challenges, and yet we're here, still together, still strong." Daniel's hand found hers, and he intertwined their fingers, bringing them to his lips for a soft kiss. "We've made it, Em. Not just survived, but thrived. You, me, and the family we built. It's more than I ever imagined." She turned to face him, her heart full as she traced the lines on his face, lines that had deepened over the years but never changed the kindness in his eyes. "I never thought I'd have this. I never thought I'd have this, us. After everything we've been through, I still can't believe it's real." Daniel smiled, brushing a stray hair from her face. "It's real, Em, and I'm so grateful it's with you." They stood there for a long moment, just enjoying the quiet beauty of the evening. The children had all gone their separate ways, but they stayed in touch, visiting when they could. Lila was now an architect with her own successful firm. James had hit it big as a comedian and writer, his unique humor and sharp wit captivating audiences everywhere. Theo, the quiet one, was finishing his studies abroad, his passion for history taking him to places Emma and Daniel had only dreamed of. Though their lives had evolved, the bond they shared was undeniable. Their family, shaped by their trials and triumphs, had grown into something extraordinary. The gathering of generations, later that evening, their family came together. Lila and Sarah, James and his partner Theo, flying in just in time to join them for a celebratory dinner in the garden. The table was set under the soft glow of fairy lights, surrounded by laughter, stories, and the warmth that only a family bound by love could bring. The years had added layers to their story. Memories of shared holidays, birthday parties, quiet, nights at home. But through it all, there was one constant: Emma and Daniel's love for one another. As they sat together at the table, their children surrounded them, Emma raised her glass. "To family," she said, her voice steady and full of emotion. "To love. To the life we've built together, even when we didn't know how. To all the things we didn't expect, but we got anyway. To love," Daniel added, his voice rich with meaning as he looked at her. "And to us," Lila said, her voice warm as she raised her glass. "The best parents we could ever ask for." The rest of the family followed suit, each toasting in their own way, with their hearts full. Emma looked at Daniel, the man who had walked beside her through every challenge, every joy, and every heartache. She had once feared that love might be fleeting, that the past would define her. But now, standing here with him, surrounded by the family they had built, she knew the truth. Their love had been forged in fire, tested by time, and had only grown stronger with each passing year. This wasn't just a story of surviving, it was a story of thriving, of a love that had endured every storm and emerged victorious. She leaned into Daniel, their foreheads touching, a soft smile on both of their faces. "Together," she whispered. "Always," Daniel replied, his voice filled with certainty. And as the night stretched on, filled with laughter, stories, and the warmth of family, a wedding shrouded in secrets, the circle of time. 30 years later, the Westwood family had changed, but in many ways it had come full circle. Emma and Daniel, now older and wiser, had become the anchors of the family, their love standing as a beacon of hope and strength for the younger generations who followed in their footsteps. The house had seen its fair share of new faces, partners, children, and even grandchildren, but through it all, the essence of what they had built together remained untouched. Their children had all found their own ways in the world, but the Yase roots of their upbringing, love, resilience, and deep familial bonds, had taken hold in ways Emma and Daniel had never anticipated. Lila, now married with 2 children of her own, had started her own architectural firm, designing homes that felt as warm and inviting as the one she had grown up in. James, with his comedic talents, had expanded beyond stand-up into television and film, where his writing touched countless lives. Theo, now a well-respected historian, had returned to teach at a prestigious university, sharing his love of history with students eager to learn. But it was the grandchildren who had become the new heartbeat of the house. Their laughter filled the rooms where Emma and Daniel had once made their own memories. The house was once again a place of chaos, of life, and of love. Emma stood by the window one afternoon, looking out over the sprawling yard where her grandchildren played. The trees had grown taller over the years, and the garden she had so carefully tended to had flourished beyond anything she had ever imagined. But more than the beauty of the land, it was the sound of the laughter, the joy, the love. It was the legacy she and Daniel had created together. Daniel walked into the room, his steps slow but still strong. He had aged gracefully, the lines on his face marking the years of their shared journey, but his eyes still held the same spark they had when they first met. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, his voice warm with the familiarity of decades spent in each other's company. Emma smiled, her heart full. "Just thinking about how far we've come, about everything we've built. I never imagined it would turn out like this, you know?" He moved to stand beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You're right. I never imagined it either. But I knew, even in the hardest times, we were building something that would last, something that would stand the test of time." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "And you were right. We made it, Daniel. We made it, through all of it." His lips curved into a soft smile, one that spoke volumes of the love they'd shared. "We did, and I'd do it all again, every moment." Emma chuckled, her voice light. "Even that wedding weekend?" Daniel laughed too, his eyes crinkling with affection. "Especially that wedding weekend, because without it we wouldn't have come to this moment, would we?" She shook her head in fond disbelief. "No, I guess not. Sometimes it feels like everything that happened led us exactly here, and I can't imagine being anywhere else." He reached for her hand, his grip strong as ever. "Neither can I. This is our story, Em, and no one can take it from us." The grandchildren's turn later that evening. The entire family gathered in the living room for a small celebration. The children and grandchildren sat around with Emma and Daniel at the center, their faces glowing with the warmth of their years together. The younger generation, ever curious, asked them to share more stories about the past, stories about their early years, the challenges they faced, and the lessons they learned. Lila's daughter, a bright-eyed 10-year-old named Sophie, leaned forward eagerly. "Grandma, Grandpa, tell us about the time you got married. The real story." Emma and Daniel exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with a shared, silent understanding. Then Daniel smiled, and Emma joined him, her voice soft but steady as she began. "Well, it all started with a secret," Emma said, her tone teasing but full of warmth. "A family secret that almost tore everything apart." As she spoke, she glanced at the faces of her family, her children, her grandchildren, who were hanging on every word. She and Daniel had always been open about their past, knowing that Their story was one of resilience and love. And now, years later, it was no longer a story of hardship. It was a story of triumph. She finished, looking into Daniel's eyes. But we made it through, together. And I'll never forget how that secret, as painful as it was, led us to the love we have today. Because, in the end, love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every single day. Daniel nodded, his voice thick with emotion. Exactly. And what matters most is that we chose to build something beautiful, despite everything. The room was filled with applause, the younger generation moved by the strength of their grandparents' journey. A wedding shrouded in secrets, the circle of time. 30 years later, the Westwood family had changed, but in many ways, it had come full circle. Emma and Daniel, now older and wiser, had become the anchors of the family, their love standing as a beacon of hope and strength for the younger generations who followed in their footsteps. The house had seen its fair share of new faces, partners, children, and even grandchildren, but through it all, the essence of what they had built together remained untouched. Their children had all found their own ways in the world, but the roots of their upbringing, love, resilience, and deep familial bonds had taken hold in ways Emma and Daniel had never anticipated. Lila, now married with 2 children of her own, had started her own architectural firm, designing homes that felt as warm and inviting as the one she had grown up in. James, with his comedic talents, had expanded beyond stand-up into television and film, where his writing touched countless lives. Theo, now a well-respected historian, had returned to teach at a prestigious university, sharing his love of history with students eager to learn. But it was the grandchildren who had become the new heartbeat of the house. Their laughter filled the rooms where Emma and Daniel had once made their own memories. The house was once again a place of chaos, of life, and of love. Emma stood by the window one afternoon, looking out over the sprawling yard where her grandchildren played. The trees had grown taller over the years, and the garden she had so carefully tended to had flourished beyond anything she had ever imagined. But more than the beauty of the land, it was the sound of the laughter, the joy, the love. It was the legacy she and Daniel had created together. Daniel walked into the room, his steps slow but still strong. He had aged gracefully, the lines on his face marking the years of their shared journey, but his eyes still held the same spark they had when they first met. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, his voice warm with the familiarity of decades spent in each other's company. Emma smiled, her heart full. "Just thinking about how far we've come, about everything we've built. I never imagined it would turn out like this, you know?" He moved to stand beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You're right. I never imagined it either. But I knew, even in the hardest times, we were building something that would last. Something that would stand the test of time." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "And you were right. We made it, Daniel. We made it, through all of it." His lips curved into a soft smile, one that spoke volumes of the love they'd shared. "We did, and I'd do it all again. Every moment." Emma chuckled, her voice light. "Even that wedding weekend?" Daniel laughed too, his eyes crinkling with affection. "Especially that wedding weekend, because without it, we wouldn't have come to this moment, would we?" She shook her head in fond disbelief. "No, I guess not. Sometimes it feels like everything that happened led us exactly here, and I can't imagine being anywhere else." He reached for her hand, his grip strong as ever. "Neither can I. This is our story, Em, and no one can take it from us." The grandchildren's turn later that evening. The entire family gathered in the living room for a small celebration. The children and grandchildren sat around with Emma and Daniel at the center, their faces glowing with the warmth of their years together. The younger generation, ever curious, asked them to share more stories about the past, stories about their early years, the challenges they faced, and the lessons they learned. Lila's daughter, a bright-eyed 10-year-old named Sophie, leaned forward eagerly. "Grandma, Grandpa, tell us about the time you got married, the real story." Emma and Daniel exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with a shared, silent understanding. Then, Daniel smiled, and Emma joined him, her voice soft but steady as she began. "Well, it all started with a secret," Emma said, her tone teasing but full of warmth. "A family secret that almost tore everything apart." As she spoke, she glanced at the faces of her family, her children, her grandchildren, who were hanging on every word. She and Daniel had always been open about their past, knowing that their story was one of resilience and love. And now, years later, it was no longer a story of hardship. It was a story of triumph. She finished, looking into Daniel's eyes. "But we made it through, together. And I'll never forget how that secret, as painful as it was, led us to the love we have today. Because in the end, love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every single day." Daniel nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Exactly. And what matters most is that we chose to build something beautiful, despite everything." The room was filled with applause, the younger generation moved by the strength of their grandparents' journey. A wedding shrouded in secrets, the circle of time. 30 years later, the Westwood family had changed, but in many ways it had come full circle. Emma and Daniel, now older and wiser, had become the anchors of the family, their love standing as a beacon of hope and strength for the younger generations who followed in their footsteps. The house had seen its fair share of new faces, partners, children, and even grandchildren, but through it all, the essence of what they had built together remained untouched. Their children had all found their own ways in the world, but the roots of their upbringing, love, resilience, and deep familial bonds, had taken hold in ways Emma and Daniel had never anticipated. Lila, now married with 2 children of her own, had started her own architectural firm, designing homes that felt as warm and inviting as the one she had grown up in. James, with his comedic talents, had expanded beyond stand-up into television and film, where his writing touched countless lives. Theo, now a well-respected historian, had returned to teach at a prestigious university, sharing his love of history with students eager to learn. But it was the grandchildren who had become the new heartbeat of the house. Their laughter filled the rooms where Emma and Daniel had once made their own memories. The house was once again a place of chaos, of life, and of love. Emma stood by the window one afternoon, looking out over the sprawling yard where her grandchildren played. The trees had grown taller over the years, and the garden she had so carefully tended to had flourished beyond anything she had ever imagined. But more than the beauty of the land, it was the sound of the laughter, the joy, the love. It was the legacy she and Daniel had created together. Daniel walked into the room, his steps slow but still strong. He had aged gracefully, the lines on his face marking the years of their shared journey, but his eyes still held the same spark they had when they first met. "Penny for your thoughts?" he asked, his voice warm with the familiarity of decades spent in each other's company. Emma smiled, her heart full. "Just thinking about how far we've come, about everything we've built. I never imagined it would turn out like this, you know?" He moved to stand beside her, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "You're right. I never imagined it either. But I knew, even in the hardest times, we were building something that would last, something that would stand the test of time." She turned to face him, her eyes searching his. "And you were right. We made it, Daniel. We made it. Through all of it. His lips curved into a soft smile, one that spoke volumes of the love they'd shared. We did. And I'd do it all again. Every moment. Emma chuckled, her voice light. Even that wedding weekend? Daniel laughed too, his eyes crinkling with affection. Especially that wedding weekend, because without it we wouldn't have come to this moment, would we? She shook her head in fond disbelief. No, I guess not. Sometimes it feels like everything that happened led us exactly here, and I can't imagine being anywhere else. He reached for her hand, his grip strong as ever. Neither can I. This is our story, Em, and no one can take it from us. The grandchildren's turn later that evening, the entire family gathered in the living room for a small celebration. The children and grandchildren sat around with Emma and Daniel at the center, their faces glowing with the warmth of their years together. The younger generation, ever curious, asked them to share more stories about the past, stories about their early years, the challenges they faced, and the lessons they learned. Lila's daughter, a bright-eyed 10-year-old named Sophie, leaned forward eagerly. Grandma, Grandpa, tell us about the time you got married, the real story. Emma and Daniel exchanged a glance, their eyes filled with a shared, silent understanding. Then Daniel smiled, and Emma joined him, her voice soft but steady as she began. Well, it all started with a secret, Emma said, her tone teasing but full of warmth. A family secret that almost tore everything apart. As she spoke, she glanced at the faces of her family, her children, her grandchildren, who were hanging on every word. She and Daniel had always been open about their past, knowing that their story was one of resilience and love, and now, years later, it was no longer a story of hardship. It was a story of triumph. She finished, looking into Daniel's eyes. But we made it through, together. And I'll never forget how that secret, as painful as it was, led us to the love we have today. Because in the end, love isn't about perfection. It's about choosing each other every single day. Daniel nodded, his voice thick with emotion. Exactly. And what matters most is that we chose to build something beautiful, despite everything. The room was filled with applause, the younger generation moved by the strength of their grandparents' journey. A wedding shrouded in secrets. The legacy lives on. 35 years later, the Westwood estate had transformed once again. Though Emma and Daniel were no longer the young, impetuous couple that had once fallen into love amidst family secrets and challenges, they had become pillars of strength and wisdom. The estate had become a gathering place, a sanctuary where the extended family, including children, grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren, would gather on weekends to celebrate the bond that had been woven together over the years. Emma stood on the same porch where she and Daniel had often reflected on the past, gazing over the expansive grounds where she had once watched their children play. Now, she could see the next generation of little ones running around, their energy a reminder of the joyful chaos that had once filled the house. The garden she had meticulously curated bloomed with vibrant flowers, an eternal symbol of the love and care she had given it, and it had given back to her in kind. "Hey, love," Daniel called out from behind her, his voice steady but tinged with age. He had slowed over the years, but his presence remained as commanding as ever. "You planning to just stare at the garden all day? Or do you plan on letting me take you out for a walk?" Emma turned, a smile spreading across her face at the sight of him. His hair was silver now, his once dark locks faded with time, but his eyes still held that familiar spark. She had always known him as the man who would stand by her no matter what, and in these years, he had proven it again and again. "I was just remembering," she said softly, "how we started. How we didn't know if we could make it. But we did, and now look at us. Look at this." She gestured toward the laughter of their grandchildren, who were busy playing in the distance. Daniel walked over and stood beside her, his hand finding hers. He gave it a gentle squeeze, as though reassuring her that no matter how many years had passed, they were still in this together. I remember those early days, all the fear, the doubt, but I always knew we'd get through it. We just had to keep choosing each other every single day. Even after all the chaos? Emma asked, her eyes twinkling. Especially after the chaos, Daniel replied with a wink. If I'd known how much chaos we'd have, I'd have said yes, even faster. What we've built here, it's more than I could have ever dreamed of. Emma leaned her head against his shoulder, closing her eyes and taking in the quiet peace that surrounded them. Despite everything, the secrets, the challenges, the hard times, they had made it through. They had created a home, a family, a legacy. The soft sounds of their great-grandchildren's laughter echoed in the distance. Emma smiled. She hadn't expected to be a great-grandmother, but she found that she loved it. To see the next generation carry forward the lessons of love, resilience, and family meant everything to her. It was a fulfillment she hadn't anticipated, but one she embraced with open arms. Daniel kissed the top of her head. "We've done well, haven't we?" "Yes," she whispered. "We've done more than well." A family reunion as. The years went by, the Westwood family continued to flourish. The family gatherings, once filled with the laughter of children, now included spouses, partners, and friends, all united by the legacy that Emma and Daniel had carefully nurtured. It was during one of these reunions that the full scope of what they had created became undeniable. The children, now adults with families of their own, gathered around Emma and Daniel, sitting in the old living room where so many memories had been made. They could see the traces of their younger selves in their parents' eyes. The same love, the same dedication, the same commitment to the family they had built together. Lila, now a renowned architect, stood and raised a glass. "To Mom and Dad," she said, her voice full of admiration and love, "for showing us what it means to love unconditionally, to fight for each other, and to never give up. Your love is our blueprint, and everything we've built in our lives has come from the foundation you gave us." James, now a successful writer and father of two, added with a grin, "You two are the reason we're all as crazy as we are, but also the reason we know that family is everything. You've set the bar high for all of us." Theo, ever the reflective one, stood and shared his thoughts. "You gave us more than we could have ever asked for. The lessons you taught us weren't just about love. They were about living life with purpose, finding joy in the little moments, and always having each other's backs. We are who we are because of you." Their grandchildren, now growing up with their own sense of wonder and excitement about life, looked at Emma and Daniel with awe, just as their parents had once done. Even the great-grandchildren, too young to fully understand the weight of the words, a wedding, shrouded in secrets, a love reborn. 40 years later. The Westwood estate, nestled beneath the watchful gaze of towering oak trees and surrounded by fields of golden light, was as grand as ever, but in a different way. Its walls, now, infused with the wisdom of 4 decades, held echoes of laughter and quiet conversations, of moments of joy and sorrow, each one wrapped in the enduring embrace of love. Though the years had passed, filling the house with stories, with growth, and with change, the house remained a constant. Emma and Daniel's love had become the very fabric of their family, woven tightly into the threads of every generation. They had built this home not just with bricks and mortar, but with the foundation of their enduring bond. Today, the estate was filled once more. Their children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and friends had all gathered to celebrate the anniversary of Emma and Daniel's wedding. It was a bittersweet day, filled with reflection, gratitude, and the knowledge that, for all the time that had passed, some things never changed. Emma stood at the window of the room that once belonged to her children. The sun shone softly over the hills, casting long shadows and illuminating the garden she had cultivated with her own hands. She could see her great-grandchildren running through the same grass her own children had played on decades ago, their laughter a sweet echo of the past. Daniel, older now, but still the man she had loved since that fateful wedding day, entered the room with his trademark gentle smile. He had seen so many seasons pass with her by his side, and while the years had changed them both in ways they hadn't imagined, the core of their love had remained as strong as ever. "Ready to head downstairs?" he asked, his voice still filled with that soft warmth that had comforted her all those years ago. Emma smiled, feeling the years of life and love between them in a rush of nostalgia. She turned toward him, her eyes soft but steady. "Yes. Let's go remind everyone that the best part of this family is you." Daniel chuckled, reaching out to take her hand. They had been through so much together. Heartache, joy, growth, and loss. But in every moment they had clung to one another, choosing each other again and again. That choice had given birth to a legacy more beautiful than either of them could have dreamed. As they descended the stairs together, hand in hand, their children and grandchildren stood to greet them. The room was filled with faces they had known since birth, familiar smiles, familiar eyes, but each one had grown, had taken on their own character. And yet, the same love that had bound them together all those years ago was still there, quiet but unbreakable. The room fell silent for a moment as Emma and Daniel entered, and then their children, one by one, raised their glasses in a unified toast. "To Mom and Dad," Lila said, her voice filled with emotion, "for everything they have given us, love, hope, family, for showing us that no matter the challenges, love will always find a way. And to the secret that started it all," James added with a grin, "for teaching us that the truth is always worth facing." The family chuckled softly, and Emma felt a warmth spread through her chest. Over the years, the secret that had threatened to tear them apart had become a part of their story, a story that had shaped them, but didn't define them. It was no longer a shadow. It was a lesson that had woven itself into their lives, transforming pain into understanding and healing. "Thank you," Emma said, her voice soft but steady. "For all of you. For carrying the lessons we learned into your own lives. For keeping our story alive. And for not letting us off the hook for the real story of the wedding," Daniel teased, his eyes twinkling. The room erupted into laughter, the air thick with joy. Their great-grandchildren, now old enough to understand the gravity of the day, turned to their parents with curious eyes. "Grandma," asked little Ava, Emma's oldest great-granddaughter, "will we have a story like yours when we get older?" Emma, looking down at Ava with a love that transcended generations, knelt beside her. She gently took her hand, her voice filled with certainty. "You will, darling. You'll have your own story, one that will be just as beautiful, just as full of love. Every generation builds on the one before it. And as long as you choose love, it will carry you through." Daniel joined her, his hand resting on Ava's shoulder. "You may not always know it, but love will guide you. It will be there when you need it most." Ava nodded, her face serious as she absorbed their words. In that moment, the legacy of Emma and Daniel, of love, resilience, and hope, was passed on once more. A full circle of love as the day wore on. The family shared stories and memories, recounting their own journeys, of triumphs, of mistakes, of lessons learned.